Come with us on a musical journey through some of the most magnificent places on earth. Great towns and cities of Europe, steeped in history and beauty, and resounding with the stories and music of the world's great composers. Mozart, Bach, Beethoven, Grieg, Vivaldi, Tchaikovsky. Just some of the greats in our classical destinations. We're off, once again, on a musical journey through some of the great cities of Europe. Ah, Venice, city of canals, romance, and music. But I'll leave it to my fellow presenters, who appear to have adapted quickly to the challenges of getting round this city.
Hi, welcome to Classical Destinations. I'm Matt Wills.
And I'm Nikki Vasilakis.
And today we'll be showing you some of the sites for which Venice is famous, and a few others as well.
And we'll also be enjoying some of the music of two of Italy's finest, Claudio Monteverdi and Antonio Vivaldi.
Venice lies on the northeastern coast of Italy, at the northern end of the Adriatic Sea. The city is built on more than 100 islands in a swampy lagoon in the Gulf of Venice and was first established as a settlement nearly 1,600 years ago. You can imagine what a challenge it must have been to build in what was effectively a swamp. Many of the construction techniques that evolved as a response were unique to Venice, involving impermeable stone supported by rafts and timber piles. They've been successful because many of the buildings have stood for over 400 years. As land is at a premium, virtually everything is built right up to the water's edge, making boats the only way to get around, apart from foot, of course.
A stroll through Venice is like going back in time. So many of these buildings built 300, 400, 500 years ago. But you'd better be careful. So many of these streets and alleyways are a bit like a maze, and the unwary tourist can soon get hopelessly lost.
The principal link to the mainland is by train, but it's the Grand Canal that binds the city, which carries us to meet our first composer. So much of Venice hasn't changed since Canaletto first began capturing its beauty on canvas in the 1700s. TV aerials and motors on the boats, yes, but so many building facades remain unaltered. This one, the Palazzo Barbarigo, still has the remnants of 16th century frescoes on its facade. This bridge, the Ponte di Rialto, is a famous landmark here in Venice. It was built in the late 1500s, and for many years was the only way to get across the Grand Canal. Now, these buildings, the Palazzo Farsetti and Palazzo Loredan, were built around 1200. They now house the city council. In 1807, Napoleon watched a regatta in his honor from up there in Palazzo Balbi. Here is the church of Santa Maria della Salute. It was built to commemorate the end of the plague which ravaged the city in 1630. Salute, meaning health and salvation. The church took 57 years to build and is supported by over 1 million timber piles. At the other end of the Grand Canal, one can disembark and head for what Napoleon called the finest drawing room in Europe, the Piazza San Marco, St. Mark's Square, bordered at one end by the famous Basilica. The Piazza San Marco is the largest open space in Venice, and it seems even more so after you spent time exploring the narrow streets and canals surrounding it. The Basilica di San Marco is Byzantine in its aesthetic. Its floor plan is based on the Greek cross, and the 5 cupolas are lined inside with stunning mosaics on gold backgrounds.
This is actually the 3rd church on this site. The first was begun over 1200 years ago, and the altar at the back of the church supposedly houses the remains of St. Mark.
The Basilica, renowned for its acoustic, has employed some eminent music directors, maestri di capella, in its long history, none more so than Claudio Monteverdi. Monteverdi was born at Cremona, northern Italy, in 1567 and studied with a maestro di capella at the cathedral there. His first published work of sacred madrigals was published in 1582, so he must have been something of a child prodigy. Monteverdi moved to Mantua and entered the service of the Duke as a composer and singer of madrigals. He ventured into the brand new genre of opera by writing the very first opera to be performed regularly today, his Orfeo, in 1607.
Following the Duke's death, he was appointed here to St. Mark's. Now, this is where things really gelled for Monteverdi. He composed a flow of sacred works which were brilliant and helped spread his fame throughout England and Europe.
In 1630, the plague ravaged Venice, and in the same year, Austrian troops attacked and pillaged Mantua, destroying the manuscripts of 12 operas Monteverdi had composed there and left behind when he moved to Venice. These twin shocks must have caused him to take stock. Monteverdi took holy orders in 1632 and composed less. But when Venice's first opera house was opened in 1637, the 70-year-old priest was drawn back to the stage, and new operas flowed from his pen.
Pretty well everyone who's ever been to Venice has been pierced by its beauty. It always seems to me, in the right light anyway, not to be sinking slowly into the sea, as it is, but to have just emerged from it. And really, it might just as well have been underwater for all the centuries since it was built, for all the change that has taken place there. It looks exactly the way it did when Canaletto painted it. And in some kind of a way, it seems to have been rendered immortal by being turned into music by the great Italian Baroque composers Gabriele Vivaldi, Monteverdi. The formality, the exuberance, the bright clarity of what they wrote seems to directly translate the space, the water, the clear light of the square in front of the Basilica of San Marco into sound. I'm romanticizing. In fact, because Monteverdi had refined what we think of as the Venetian sound long before he ever came to Venice. His stupendous setting of the Vespers of the Blessed Virgin Mary was composed, in fact, while he was still in Mantua. It's even been suggested that it might have been a sort of audition piece for the position he occupied with such distinction here at St. Mark's in Venice. But if you look round the basilica, look up at all those platforms, nooks and crannies where musicians can be concealed, just raining sound down from the dome, giving the music this extraordinary spaciousness. It really is hard not to believe that it was written for St. Mark's.
Behind St. Mark's Basilica is the Doge's Palace, or Palazzo Ducale. It started out in the 9th century as a castle, but had some bad luck with fires over the next few hundred years. Much of the exterior dates from the 14th and 15th centuries. Sadly, fires in the 16th century destroyed most of the artworks housed inside, paintings by Fabriano, Bellini, and Titian. This is the church of San Zaccaria. Every year, the Doge would visit the Benedictine convent that's attached to the church. The nuns had somewhat of a reputation. Many of them were from noble families who didn't want to pay the dowries demanded by marriage and so remained single under the care of the church. But inside, it is this masterpiece, the Madonna and Child with Saints, painted by Bellini in 1505, which captures the eye. Nearby, the promenade known as Riva della Schiavoni is one of the liveliest parts of Venice. The Venetian water buses, or vaporetti, stop here all the time, carrying loads of tourists and locals. The view from here across the lagoon to the island of San Giorgio Maggiore is one of the most beautiful in Venice.
Ah, the Hotel Danieli. Time for a bit of history.
The Danieli is one of the most celebrated hotels in Europe. It was built nearly 700 years ago and was the venue in 1630 for the first opera performed in Venice, Proserpina Rapita, by our old friend Monteverdi.
For nearly 1100 years of its history, Venice was a powerful independent republic, and ruling this republic were the princes known as the Doges. The hotel was originally built as the palace of Doge Andrea Dandolo, hence is also known as the Palazzo Dandolo.
The palace became a hotel in 1822 and was popular with artists and writers. The French composer Claude Debussy stayed here, as did Richard Wagner. Even Charles Dickens enjoyed the comforts of the Danieli. Of course, much of Venice's history is far from this sort of glamour. During the 16th to 18th centuries, Venice was a decadent place. Unwanted pregnancies abounded, and for those unable to keep their babies, there was an alternative.
Here at the Ospedale della Pietà, they specialized in the musical training of young orphan girls. Incidentally, in those days, newborns would be dropped in a chute, a little larger than this one, obviously, for the care of the orphanage. The training here was believed to be so good that even well-off families would sometimes leave their newborns to be brought up and trained by the Pietà. However, the Pope wasn't too happy about that, hence this sign.
May the Lord God strike with curses and excommunications all those who send or permit their sons and daughters, whether illegitimate or natural, to be sent to this hospital of the Pietà, having the means and ability to bring them up. For they will be obliged to pay back every expense and amount spent on them. Pope Paul III, 1548.
So why am I talking about an orphanage? Well, from 1703, Antonio Vivaldi was maestro di violino here and spent most of his time over the next 15 years educating the young ladies of the Pietà.
Vivaldi wrote for his charges some of the greatest music of the Italian Baroque, including the famous cycle of violin concertos called Le Quattro Stagioni, or the Four Seasons.
Antonio Vivaldi was born in this house in 1678. His father Giovanni was a barber turned violinist at San Marco, and young Antonio would often serve as his deputy. A few doors from where he was born is the church of San Giovanni in Braga, where baby Antonio was baptized.
As was often the case with many less well-to-do families, the eldest son, as Antonio was, trained for the priesthood, thus enabling him to receive an education. He was ordained in 1703, though never said Mass, claiming medical reasons.
Venice was famous for its annual carnival, when citizens could put on their masks and enjoy an 8-week party during the months of January and February before submitting to the austerities of Lent. Anything and everything, we're told, went. The consequences of all that uninhibited carnality might well explain the large number of foundlings abandoned by their unmarried mothers in the Venice of the 18th century. Very often they were sent off to the orphanage, where the music master was the temperamental and explosive Antonio Vivaldi. Many of the 500-odd concertos that he wrote, many of them fiendishly difficult, were written for his charges. Imagine first hearing all the vivid sound pictures conjured up by the Four Seasons, played by an ensemble of young nuns in white robes with pomegranate flowers in their hair. So it seems that maybe we owe one of the glories of the Baroque musical repertory to a social problem.
In those days, it was not seemly for young ladies to play in public, so they played behind screens. Now, this only served to heighten the mystery and allure.
This is the Church of the Pietà, also known as the Church of Vivaldi, even though it wasn't begun until after his death. The ceiling fresco, Triumph of Faith, was painted by Giambattista Tiepolo in 1755. The church hosts concerts still, which over the years have been very popular, and always with a distinct Vivaldi flavor.
Vivaldi did such a good job teaching the young ladies that the Pietà employed no other violin teachers during his lifetime. Concerts at the orphanage were hugely popular events for Venetian society and even had a reputation abroad. Where else could people go to hear a choir and orchestra composed entirely of musically gifted young ladies? Today, the Metropole Hotel stands on the site of the original orphanage and church. The interiors feature beautiful displays, including the remnants of the old church. Vivaldi took leave from the Pietà to travel, and his output was prolific. Between 1725 and 1728, he premiered 8 operas in Venice and Florence, composing 3 of them in less than 3 months. In the town of Mantua, he became acquainted with a singer, Anna Giraud, who moved in with him, and together they lived here, one of Vivaldi's many houses in Venice. Anna had an ordinary voice, but she was said to be quite attractive, with a fascinating mouth and strong stage presence. She managed to feature prominently in Vivaldi's operas from then on. The composer always maintained that she was no more than a housekeeper and a good friend, just like her sister, who also shared his house. Vivaldi had become fashionable. He received a number of commissions from foreign rulers, including Louis XV of France. Even the Pope asked Vivaldi to play the violin for him at a private audience. And despite all his travels, he remained in the employ of the Pietà, who required him to send them 2 concertos per month. After 1735, the Pietà, though no longer expecting manuscripts, continued to pay him an honorarium for his faithful services. Vivaldi had success all over Europe, but in 1740 he decided to move to Vienna and settle down under the patronage of his admirer, the Habsburg Emperor Charles VI. Sad to say, Charles died that same year. More to the point, Antonio himself died in July of the following year.
Most of the great composers have been known from the time they lived right through to the present day. And in our times, Vivaldi is probably one of the better known of them. But it wasn't always that way for him.
We know Vivaldi's works well today, especially the 4 Seasons, one of his 550 violin concertos. But they've only really been popular in the last 80 years or so, and for one good reason. In the period between, his works simply vanished.
Up until the early 1900s, Vivaldi's name had all but disappeared, known only to musicologists. But in 1926, a boarding school in the mountains of northern Italy found a large number of volumes and thought they could earn some funds by selling them. He contacted the Turin National Library to have someone put a value on them. That someone was Dr. Alberto Gentili.
Upon opening the first crate, he saw Vivaldi's name on manuscript after manuscript. He was utterly astonished and very quickly realized the importance of what he had in front of him. But he also noticed something else. From the way the manuscripts were numbered, about half of them were missing.
Gentili eventually tracked down these remaining works. They had been part of a split inheritance some 140 years before. With this enormous collection of Vivaldi now safely in the hands of Turin Library in 1939, the world could at last enjoy his works again.
I could quite easily get used to this.
Sure beats the peak hour traffic. Well, if Venice is the city of romance, next episode sees us in the city of enchantment, Prague, capital of the Czech Republic.
So while Matt and Nikki drift off in their gondola, we've moved on from the haunted city of Venice to the exuberant, the magnificent, but the very human city of Prague. Prague means Dvorak and Smetana, of course, but also Mozart and even Vivaldi had great success here. So, goodbye, until the next time, from
From me, Simon Callow.